May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, doing our bit to help preserve the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we have a guest, Kelly Chadwick. Kelly is my son, and he was born at Green Gulch Farm in 1973 on October 4th, just above the kitchen in the little room at the top of the stairs. And Kelly's going to share with us some memories he has. His oldest memory was being a baby at Tassajara. He was there from the time he was 3 months old till he was just about 2. We left Tassajara. His mother, Dianne Goldschlag at the time, now Daya Goldschlag, who is a teacher in our lineage, Soto Shunryu Suzuki lineage in Spokane, Washington, where Kelly lives. So he's going to talk about a lot about his experience at Tassajara, more so recently than growing up, but he draws on the experience of growing up around Zen Center. But he's been going to Tassajara with the crew. He's an arborist with the crew and trimming trees for some years. And his tree trimming business is Spirit Pruners in Spokane, Washington. So, I think that's all we need right now. You'll learn more about him in the podcast. And at the very end, I'm going to read something in this book I'm working on, Tassajara Stories. I asked him to write something for it, for a sort of epilogue, because he, as you'll hear, he's rather articulate and says some pretty interesting things. And so he kept putting it off and, not doing it. And he was overthinking it, I thought. So I called him up and talked to him about it, and I recorded him. And then I said, I've got it. This is good. So he's got it now, and he wants to add a few things. But it's really good the way it is, and I'm not going to let him, make it too complete. I don't think he will, though. He's got a good sense of writing and speaking. So I'm going to read that piece at the end. All right, well, that's it. So look, when you hear the bell, if you have such a mind, hit pause and meditate or whatever for as long as you wish. And when you're ready to come back, hit unpause. And we'll be here to hit the bell to end the meditation or whatever, and we'll give Kelly Bernard Chadwick a call. But incidentally, Kelly was my father's name, and Bernard is was Daya's father's name.
Hey, Dad.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm here playing with my crystals and rocks.
Oh, wow. You're playing with your crystals and rocks. Tell me about that.
Well, growing up, in the environment I did with you and running around the land, I didn't really have toys for the most part. My toys was, what I interacted with in nature pretty much. And I feel like that is carried through.
Hmm. You grew up with me. You grew up with me, and who else?
Well, I spent a lot of time, with you on the ocean, running around and on cliffs and at Muir Beach, at Tassajara. So it was with my friends or, with you or my mom, but it was generally in nature.
Yeah.
And I feel like it influenced me. And in some ways I consider that one of my parents.
Huh, yeah. So you had a lot of nature. That is certainly true. That's really good. Yeah, yeah. So, let us know what you're up to these days. What do you do, and what's happening in your life?
My primary passion right now is split between my work, which is with trees. I have a company, Spirit Pruners, and I do some consulting, some speaking, and then I run this little collection of arborists. And then channeling. I'm really interested in the world of channeling, and my belief systems are based in that. And I work with a channel who's also my girlfriend. So those are my two big passions right now. And then I have a bunch of other my fingers and other activities. I have a little nonprofit I'm starting called Temple Foundation, and I do a little bit of woodwork and some other activities. I just started taking tennis lessons for the first time in 35 years.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow. Yeah, you were a good tennis player. Huh.
Yeah, it's frustrating though, when you don't do something, it takes a while to come back. And then even now, every year when I play, I forget my forehand. My backhand's fine, my volley's fine, my forehand completely goes away, and it takes me a while before I remember it. So that was one reason I was taking tennis lessons, is I wanted that consistency.
Well, I think it's better to have problems with your forehand than your backhand. If you got a good backhand, that's really solid.
Yeah, it's tougher for people to get that. So it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Try two-handed forehand.
Okay.
I wish I had learned two-handed. I just think it's better.
Really? Why is that?
Better for the body.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think it's better tennis. But anyway. Your Spirit Pruners there in Spokane, Washington State, it has been going for how many years now?
12.
Is that right?
12 years. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And man, has it grown. You had another passion that went back to your childhood, which is fungi.
Yeah, what's funny though, as we talked about crystals, is it actually started with rocks. My first passion, was rocks and stones, and I got into crystals when I was like 10 or 11, and I was really into it, and would walk down to the crystal shop in Haight-Ashbury and talk to those guys. And then when I moved to Spokane, the rock scene was these old rockhound guys that were a lot of them were kind of creepy and odd. And so I lost interest. But what I find interesting is it started with, stones, and then which is like earth, right, and mineral. And then it went into fungi, and I got, absolutely completely obsessed by mushrooms and fungi for a couple of decades, more than anyone I've met except for, prominent people in the field. And then it went into trees, plants, and kind of back somewhat to stones, but really trees is where I am. And it was in between those two was also wine, which is like fruit, right? So it was like mineral, then the mycelium and the earth moving up into the tree, but it was like the fruit, fungi or fruit, and then the fruit of the tree, and then the tree. So I feel like there's a continuum of interest. And I'm still updrafting on the tree interest. It hasn't waned yet. Of just wanting to dive into that knowledge and, but it's funny. I took a class recently. It was like a full day seminar on tree physiology and biology. And it was the most information dense class on trees and one of the most in my life. It was humbling. And it was one of those things where you feel like you know nothing, which is always the case, right? Because everything is infinitely complex, but I fancy myself now as developing a little wisdom with trees, and it kind of deflated me a bit.
That's great. That's great. Well, I want to something about mushrooms. When you were very young, like 5, 4, maybe 4, Elizabeth Sawyer was taking care of the kids in the city center. Man, and so there were a bunch of. She took you over to the Green Gulch greengrocer, and kids got things like, I don't know what they got, ice cream or something, and you got a little bag of mushrooms.
Yeah, I remember that event.
That's pretty extreme. And
yeah.
I just want to say, all right, later I took you and, like Ethan and Micah, Ethan Pacho, Darlene Cohen's son, and Tony, and Micah Sawyer, some like 2, maybe there were 3 of you. Yeah, maybe those 3, maybe 4. To maybe a Stevie Wonder concert or something in like Oakland Coliseum or something. And
you sure it wasn't Prince?
Oh, was it? No. Prince. I did take you to see Prince, I think, but that was different.
Okay.
And it wasn't in Oakland. Anyway, on the way home, we stopped at like a pancake house or something. And I just said, just get anything you want. And you got a salad.
Huh.
And it's like amazing.
Yeah. I think eating more kind of hippie Zen food definitely influenced me, but I also have always had somewhat of an aversion to sweet things. I eat massive quantities of really dark chocolate for like the last, 10, 20, last 20 years in various amounts, but otherwise, and I like ice cream a lot, but I've never really been into sweet. And actually when I got COVID, I had a couple lingering changes. And one of them was my tolerance for sweetness went way down. I couldn't eat carrots because they were too sweet for me. And I think there's something about my system. I'm just not someone that should eat a lot of sugar, and I think my system just knew that.
My sister and I, neither of us had big sweet tooths, and we did not drink cold drinks, like Coke and stuff. We actually kept some in our refrigerator for guests. We'd eat chocolate, like get a chocolate bar sometime, but we didn't have a big sweet tooth either.
Sounds genetic.
Yeah. And your wine thing is very interesting. You said both of wine and fungi, mushrooms, etc., that are fruit. Now that's interesting. That's an interesting definition of fruit because the fungi are not part of the same tree, biological tree, as what we think of as fruit. Am I correct?
Yeah, fruit just meaning the fruiting body, right? The part that is produced to produce seeds or spores. And so mushrooms are essentially, they're tissue that you can clone off the tissue. So it's just an extension of the mycelium that forms itself into a fruiting body, but then releases the spores. But in kind of the bigger picture of what they're doing, they're fruit. And, that's so part of just being an animal on the planet. If you're one that collects and eats fruit, and some people are more attracted to fruit than others, but there's something to me that's very rewarding and enriching about finding fruit, whether it be fruit on a tree or fruit, that mushroom fruiting. It's like treasure in a sense. Actually, when the last time I was in Bali visiting you, my girlfriend and I picked or ate or whatever, discovered, found, markets, trees, 22 new kinds of fruit. And that's excluding the typical tropical fruits that I'd eaten there before. And it's just an enriching. I've always been drawn to fruit. And I feel like crystals are like fruit. They're kind of the fruit of the mineral kingdom, in that they have this, it's like discovery and treasure and enriching. And it just seems inherent in the human experience and consciousness, that of foraging, along with obviously other animals. I mean, it's just part of what we do.
Yeah. Well, we could go on forever about mushrooms, because really you're a mycologist. Yes. When I've said that in the past, you'd say, well, I'm an amateur mycologist. But, you're really into it. And, you've done, you've led forays, you've taught it in college, you've, organized not a convention. You've organized
forays, gatherings.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, and wine, you were in the wine business for about how many years?
I was in the wine business for 14 years.
And you could go on forever about that. How much wine are you drinking now?
Almost none. I actually drank half a glass last night on a double date because I was at this restaurant. But that's about my max now. I have a wine cellar. It's ironic because I built this beautiful wine cellar in this house that I've been working on, and there's wines I've been aging, for 10, 15 years that are some of them up to 30 years old. And now I don't really care.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I had an experience several years ago that changed my relationship with alcohol. And I just my body wants very little before it decides it's done.
Yeah. And I would like to add here, you are not a drinker like me. You never seem to have any tendency to drink too much or do bad drugs or anything. You always just naturally had, it's more than good judgment. It's good tendencies or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. I've never been really impulsive with substances, but I do feel like I misused alcohol in my own way because, one, I'm more sensitive, and I bought into this false narrative in our society that a couple drinks was good for you, which was basically what people said back then up until recently.
Yeah.
And I used it as kind of, a complex of things to soothe myself and make it through the day. When I was down at Tassajara, the spring pruning, and meditated with my crew, Leslie, down there, we gave a talk on basically avoiding pain being the cause of most suffering. And when I look back, the two drinks I would have a night most of my adult life, sometimes it was none or one, every once in a while three, but often it was two. Even though it wasn't that bad, I do feel it soothed me in a way that kept me from facing stuff I was avoiding. And had I not have been doing that, I think I would have moved out of things that weren't good for me a lot sooner. I also feel it was probably not great for my brain. And there's, that's like the big studies that have come out in the last 5 years.
Right. They're basically saying now it's moved quite a bit toward better not to have any alcohol.
Yep. Yep.
Now, but my practice was to drink 2 drinks a day, right? And that's what I'm doing now. And the closest I can get to that is not to drink at all. You understand?
Yeah. You're saying you can get closer to 2 by not drinking than you can by drinking.
That's right.
Yeah. That's funny.
20 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's impressive. I do admire how you went from being someone who was a pretty indulgent person in many ways and also had a capacity for, using a lot of substances and seeming to survive it okay. But from that to just weaning yourself off of everything, it was surprising.
Well, I think there's probably a lot of people that, as they get older, do that better. And recently I am 7 weeks today. Without caffeine.
Oh wow! How was that?
It's I like it. Caffeine, I loved it, and I just drank tea. I haven't had coffee in 20 years either, and it was pretty. It's really not bad, but I had a health reason. I wanted to see. I was having a digestive problem. If cutting out caffeine helped, it didn't with that. But it made me feel lighter and emptier. The thing is, what I find with the thing about not doing things is there really isn't any reward, except sort of basically feeling good. Or it's just sort of like emptiness reward. But the doing the things, if you're not doing it to the point of where it's unpleasant, doing things, you get a reward. It's you enjoy it, or but not doing it, it's very subtle, the reward for not doing things.
Yeah, that's well said, and I think it speaks to the eventuality that if you want to grow as a person and deepen and have the most truest expression of your time here, that you have to do it the hard way. And you eventually have to go into kind of the mundane task of being with whatever task you're doing without the reward.
Yeah. But, another thing, Kelly, it's no effort. My quitting alcohol, tobacco, pot was never a problem. Well, it was when I was younger. It was too much pot. But later on, it was not any problem at all. But just quitting all that, it was effortless. It just happened. I had thought about it. I had thought it was a good idea, but it just happened around my 60th birthday. And I experienced no desire. There was never no withdrawal, no desire to keep doing it. I do miss tea somewhat, but because of you, I got into drinking cacao, which is a very mild stimulant, and that I thought was caffeine, but I learned from you it's something else, that a very mild stimulant. What is it?
Yeah, with theobromine. I mean, it is like caffeine. It's in that group, but it's different on the system. And like for me, I caffeine and I do not do well together, whereas cacao is, if I drink cacao in the morning, I'm better in the afternoon than if I do nothing. It's very supportive of my system. So yeah, it's, but if you drink a lot, I think it expresses more like caffeine.
Yeah. Katrinka was in some sort of tour at a, what do they call them? Where they have Very common word. A lot of different types of trees with coffee.
An orchard?
Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, one of these places that had a lot of cacao, and the guy opened up they're like string green beans, that have the pods. They're like peas in a pod, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
it's an incredibly beautiful plant. I mean, it's such a striking plant.
It is, and then, there's a lot of it grows here, right? And but the guy opened up one of the long, what would you call the
pod?
The one opened the long pod and gave each person a cacao bean and told them to chew it. And Katrina said it was pretty stimulating. I remember picking green tea off a hedge, right, in a temple in Japan, right, with monks and old ladies who could do it about 10 times faster than me. And I took one leaf. This is new growth, one small leaf. And those leaves are about the size of your small fingernail or even smaller. And it gave me a buzz all morning, that one little tiny leaf.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, that was something. I was surprised because I thought, well, there's a lot more than that if you drink a cup of tea. But anyway.
Well, I think that could potentially touch upon an aspect of plant intelligence and like the spirit realm. Shamans will say that when you interact with the plant directly, the power of its medicine, in this case caffeine or whatever stimulants are in it, is greatly amplified. Sometimes immensely. And that you can talk to plants and ask them for their medicine. When I use elderberry for, if I'm concerned I'm going to get sick, I have a tincture and I'll do it. But there's a particular elderberry plant north of here on some property I used to own that once a year I go and I prune it and I speak to it. And so when I take elderberry, I envision myself in front of that tree and I bow down to it and I think it's for its medicine. And I find it more effective. And because you were holding that tea leaf and you were interacting with the plant, that relationship might have amplified the experience.
That's very interesting. Now, I already said once we could talk forever about mushrooms, so we could talk forever about all this stuff. But I want to talk now about your experience at Tassajara. I want to hear what you have to say about being at Tassajara. What? Just talk about your experience at Tassajara. You can say Olive Zen Center or whatever, but yeah, go into that, huh?
In general or recently?
Well, however you want to approach it. I think recently is good, but So I agree. I actually want to go a little further back to 2 years ago when my mom became ordained, or whatever you call it, a lay entrustment. Is that what it was? Yeah. No. Yeah.
In San Francisco Zen Center, and I flew down there. It was a 10-day process, and Tia Strausser was leading it, and Annie Obermeyer was like her henchman under Josen, and there was 4 people that were being ordained. I flew down for the last 3 days to just assist and was given, various projects. And it was so much more moving than I would have anticipated. I did it just to support my mom. Yeah. And of course it was nostalgic being back at the city center where you used to live and I used to run around. And, as a kid, my reference, and I think to others, was more the whole place was like a playground, right? And like places to hide and places to find things. And so it's really, it's touching to go back there. But what surprised me was two things. The vessel of Zen, and the ceremonies of transmission as a tool to carry a methodology for going into deeper consciousness. I really hadn't respected it that way. You grew up around a place and you kind of just experience it at face value. But I really felt that there, and the amount of energy and being part of that. And I've always felt like intention with effort and time is what creates magic, in the sense of that something bigger than some of the parts comes out of repetition and intention, right?
Yeah.
And so being around that, and then also like the chanting of the ancestors, I've always thought, I've never really related to ancestors. I've never understood it, all these religions and traditions and cultures that worship ancestors. And in the Zen tradition, the chanting of the ancestors, it just seemed like this artifice to me.
Yeah.
But when I was there and I recognized this tradition as a sacred and rare container globally, one of a handful of systems that have been created that can carry a way of achieving consciousness and depth that transcends time and can overcome periods where people like lose the intention of it, or their heart isn't in it, and it comes back, and it's like something that's passed down. And by naming the ancestors, you're acknowledging it in the ancestor. And then I heard recently a podcast by whatever the African guy's name is, Mali Domasome, because he created this grief ritual that's spreading around the United States and is powerful experience. It's really affecting people, and it seems to be a tool for people moving out of hardship and pain and grief in a way that's more effective than other ways. And he talked about, this one was about ancestors, and it gave me a greater appreciation for them, but basically we're the spearhead of all the people, all the beings that preceded us, and we're carrying the torch. And their efforts that they actually lived and were able to procreate and pass on that torch, and their efforts to do that and do the best job they could and grow, acknowledging that, but also that you can speak to them and ask them to help you now, that you can be, he talked about how you can even be mad at them and they don't care. They understand that they messed up too and they were fallible, and they're humble about that, but they're also there to help you in ways that you can't do here, and you can manifest things in physical reality that they can't. So it's this really nice dynamic relationship. And I felt that so strongly when I was there. I just found it such a moving experience, and meditating and being part of it. So anyway, I had that experience 2 years ago. And then this spring, I flew down to Tassajara with 3 other arborists and one of their babies. And we spent a week there pruning and being and meditating. A couple years prior, I think it was, I don't remember, it was pre-COVID, so maybe it was 4 years. I had gone down there with another group from my company. And so this was the 4th time. And I definitely experienced it differently than I had when I was young. It was a really beautiful experience for me.
I can remember from talking to you recently about all this, 3 key events. One is your recent experience, and I'd like you to describe that. One is your experience 2 years ago, I think 2 years ago, when you first were aware of Tassajara as having its own spirit or something, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. And then the other, something you just told me recently on the phone, that you're, like you said, your oldest memory, right? You remember that, right?
Yeah. Well, my first memory was about 1.5, and it's around the courtyard, kind of in like a little area between the road and the courtyard is my memory, and like little place crawling, just feeling incredibly held and warm and free, and the sun on me, and I was like digging in dirt or eating it or something. And it was really clear, but the feeling was very much like I was enveloped in something that I really liked. And when I was there this time, we brought one of my kind of manager people came down, and her husband, who works with us sometimes, and their child named Zia, and she's 1.5. And it was poetic to me, the full circle of being back there with the 1.5-year-old, which was my first memory. And she was so just joyful there and free and playing and loved it. And they even took her to a full moon ceremony. And she was, she's a pretty strong kid, really, really a strong spirit and a lovely person. And she was making a lot of noise and being a kid. But the second people, however a full moon ceremony starts, like whatever priests come in and they hit something, and whatever it was that designated it was beginning, she immediately became quiet. She really recognized that something was happening, and she just received it and was with it the entire ceremony. And we were all in there. And we went for a hike together, the 5 of us, and we went across the creek, and we went to the grass area where there's, past the flats, across the creek where there's an old swing. And that's where one of the places we used to go for, quote, school during the summer, like all the kids. And Nancy and other people would take us there, and we'd have lunch and play and do whatever. And so we were there, and she was on the swing, and then we were hiking. And I thought of my current ancestors, those are who's still alive, the pioneers of Tassajara, and during that era, and there was more kids then. And just being in that incredible experience of Tassajara during the Suzuki Roshi time, and having kids running around there. And it was just, I felt like like I said, full circle. And it was really meaningful working there and being with them. But the feeling of being held, I had never placed any meaning on that. And then when I was like around 30, actually, is when that happened, what you referred to, I kind of had shut down emotionally from around the age 5 until the age 40. I mean, I pretty much did not cry for 35 years. And I was at the first time. Well, I cried a little bit when I decided to quit my martial arts teacher, like when I was 21. And there's a couple other times kind of, but the one time I remember really crying, I was at Tassajara. I hadn't been back there since I was a teenager, and I was around 30, and I'd always wanted to be, and I'd kind of gotten sidetracked in another life. And so it was meaningful for me to be there. And I was walking through the courtyard. I actually didn't even think about it until now. The same time my first memory happened as a baby, I was walking like toward the steps of the Zendo or something in that direction. And I got something enveloped me, which wasn't something. It was very clearly the consciousness of the spirit of Tassajara. And it let me know that it was there, and that it had always been there. And it just was kind of introducing itself to me, but also acknowledging that I had kind of unconsciously been aware of it. And I just started bawling and went and, sat down and cried. And that was the first time I ever had an experience, I think, of spirit world, either through a plant or a tree or a space. I've had many experiences since then, but that was the first one. And going back there, this time, I just am in a different place in my life, and I was able to just feel that. I didn't equate it to those events, but I could just feel Tassajara as an intelligent, conscious being. And I think most people that are in awe and love of that place probably experience that.
They might experience it, but I've never heard anybody speak about it as eloquently as you have.
Well, it's something that I want to experience more, and there's some other threads. I've had this dream my whole adult life where I'm, I think that's west, but when you drive in, when you arrive at the intersection, you're right next to the Zendo, the slope that goes up to your right, that real steep one, at the top of it is a field with oak trees, and it's this kind of surreally steep meadow with these big oak trees that kind of jut out in this almost like a painting. And it's the easiest way to see it is across, from the bridge. And it's funny because I've never been there. I've hiked around. I've never actually been there. But for some reason, of all the places, Tassajara, most of which I have been, that's the one that shows up in this reoccurring dream several times a year. And I'm going up that slope, and it's really difficult, and sometimes it's almost too steep. But when I arrive in that area with the meadow and the big oaks, there's this very, it's like this pregnant feeling, this feeling of something there that's important, and it feels magical and wonderful to be there. And a number of years ago, I started wondering why that is there. And when I was there this time, we had this amazing hike all day, and one of the places we went across was the ridge. And I was looking at that, and I decided the next time I'm there, I'm going to go spend time. But I feel like there's something there that I am supposed to arrive at some point in my life. And I'm looking forward to that. But I also am reading a book about the practices of the Estland Indians in terms of fire mimicry and taking care of the land. And I thought a lot about what it was like to be an Indian living there, and how difficult it would be, that it would have taken a millennia of working with the land to really know how to survive and be there. And I've thought about the monks, and having this, I think I've been told it was the first Soto Zen monastery, like traditional monastery in the Western world.
Zen, not just Soto Zen.
Oh, Zen.
Very close to the first Buddhist one.
Having that level of intention, which is different, obviously, than what the native people, the Estland people, are doing, but it's definitely a thread of a high level of attention and a lifestyle that brings people in the present moment. Having that in a place like that, there is some sort of amplification, I believe, that has to do with its relationship with people. And I will even say that there's like a vortex there that is remarkable, and that I don't know if it's that location, but earth consciousness being recognized by humans, and a form of reverence that the humans have for it, and being seen. There is, I think, like a loop, like a feedback loop of consciousness that is happening between people in that location that is not just the place in the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I also noticed for the first time leaving Tassajara that there's a sycamore tree, a sycamore that grows over like a gate right before you get to the water treatment building, that is just like a gate. And I've never heard anyone speak to it before or comment on it. And it's so obviously like the spirit gate, or the kind of chosen gate of Tassajara, along with the human built gate. And I just found that, kind of comical. And I feel like it speaks to what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. That's before entering Tassajara, maybe,
right.
Maybe 200 yards, 100 yards.
Yeah. No, I think it's more than that.
Oh, really?
I think it's a couple thousand feet.
Well, 100 yards is 900 feet, so 200 yards.
No, it's 300 feet. Yeah. It's like 700 yards.
100 yards is 300 feet. 300, yeah, all right, pardon me. Yeah. No, I've never heard anybody mention that. Only you. But there's another thing I never heard anybody mention that Paul Disco told me about recently. He said that Suzuki Roshi, before you enter the Tassajara, you're just about ready to go in, that you can see the mountains behind it, right? And Paul said he saw it in terms of there being three mountains or three peaks. They're not high mountains, but they're mountains. And he said that it's sort of like their presence is part of Tassajara. And, you know, in working on this book, Tassajara Stories, which is very close to being finished, I have thought about, you know, I'm not very interested in much of an introduction, but I think one thing I would say in introduction is I'd mention the Japanese concept of shake, which is the background of a garden. So,
Yeah.
you know, so like you have a garden, but then you have the background of what does it exist within? Are there woods around it? Is there a mountain around it? And they are part of the garden. And in building the garden, they influence what type of garden is built, or what type of, you know, even if it's not a garden, what type of environment is there is influenced by everything that surrounds it. And this book is called Tassajara Stories. It is absolutely full of stories that aren't at Tassajara. And I thought, and you know, it's got quite a bit about the city. It's got quite a bit about Green Gulch, although it's mostly Tassajara. It's 3/4 Tassajara. But I've thought, you know, it's basically a memoir about me, right? And everything else I experienced. So I'm only about a third of it, say. But I see all that other stuff as the shake, you know?
Oh, wow. I love that. Okay. I didn't know where you were going with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and that's interesting that, do you think when Paul saw that he saw it that way?
Oh, yeah. Paul has a perception of nature and natural systems far beyond most people, certainly far beyond me. He understands how things work, how to put things together, and how the world puts things together. He had a very large bonsai collection that he started as a young boy, and he's quite an insightful person.
Yeah, well, that is insightful. And when we were sitting, on this hike that we took this spring, we went up the Tony Trail a ways.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
When we stopped and had like a little snack and sat there for a while. But you could see the mountains coming in that kind of pointed into like the drainage on the west side of the Hogback, and they have
west side, man. That makes me. All right, wait a minute. Hogback. The west side's the other side. Because
that's what I'm assuming.
Tassajara Creek flows east.
Right. Yeah. And they have quite a presence to them, and they're almost fractal-like in their form. Then it reminds me of calcite crystals with the soft edges, that kind of structure. But they're clearly energetically feeding that space. So it's so interesting you say that about Paul. And I also, you know how you said they're mountains, but they're not that big? That's something I've always thought we don't have a good word for that in English language. When you see something that has the feeling of a mountain, but it's like hard to call it a mountain because it's not really that huge. And the other day, I asked AI, ChatGPT, for a word that described mountain-like structures that, were bigger than hills, but not quite as big as mountains, to make up a word, not like was there one, but to make up a word. And I loved what it came up with. They said cresta.
Ha ha. All right.
And so I'm now using that as a word. I'm thinking we should incorporate it into the English language.
Say it again.
Cresta.
Cresta. In Japanese, yama is mountain, and it's used for various sizes. Here they say Bukti, if it's short, for hill, and Gunung for a mountain. I remember Trungpa and Suzuki talking about how in America only the principal mountains are named, but like in Tibet and Japan, there's names for, lots and lots of them. And they tend to have shrines. But it depends. I mean, Japan's very population center oriented. So
yeah, wow. Well, that probably has something also to do with an ancient culture where you get more nuance, I would imagine.
Yeah. America. Well, the Indians, American Indians. Too bad we don't have Harry Roberts here. That sort of thing you could ask him. Were there names for every mountain? For every cresty. What's that word?
Cresta.
Oh, yeah. Were there names not only for the mountains but for the cresta?
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. I remember you talked about that. When that swing. You mentioned it just now too. There was that swing. You said that swing is still there.
Yeah, it's like old and rusty. And Zia, the kid I was with, got to swing on it for a while, and it's like a remnant of what used to be in a really sweet way.
Mm-hmm. Well, that I just want to make clear. If you go to Grasshopper Flats, you go to the end, you make a left and you go to the end of Grasshopper Flats, you cross the creek, and
Right.
you're going like toward the waterfall, toward the Tony Trail. It's in that flat down there before that.
Yeah, I mean, the waterfall is over to your right.
Yeah, right.
It's not, you're not in that direction. Yeah, but no, it's exactly like you're going toward the Tony Trail. It's right there in this little meadow. It's really sweet. Something else that is distinctive about that location that I'd never thought about until I was there this time is the incredibly complex and nuanced little microclimates through there. As you walk around these ridges and hills and go up and down, you'll turn a corner. You'll be in like a deserty kind of environment with Toyan and, Yerba Sante and whatever. And you'll go around a corner and there'll be like delicate ferns and little flowers. Maybe I actually saw a couple mushrooms because it was spring, which isn't normal there, with like a little teensy breeze. And there's a lot of places where there'll be like a breeze or a certain temperature or humidity that is specific to a very small location. And when you're in more intelligent and intact ecosystems, that's one thing you experience is more complexity and nuance. And I love that about it there.
Sterling Bennell, you remember Sterling?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, of course you do. Right. Sterling said, and he told me this early on, like in the 60s, that Tassajara was a meeting place of three distinct ecosystems. So I think one of them was like you could see sort of the southern desert there. And one would be I'm just guessing here, the oak, the oak and chaparral. I don't know what they'd be. I wish I'd. He did tell me what they were at the time, so maybe I.
Oh yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I could be hypnotized.
Another quality you could describe as a ecosystem type. I'm not sure, but that I also had never quite realized. How there's all these beautiful dry smells down there, that just the dry, dusty, and kind of the terpenes and volatile hydrocarbons or whatever they are that come off of the plants there. You kind of pick that up. And I started noticing when I was hiking how many plants there that are herbal or medicinal, that are like almost smell like a thyme. There's obviously like bay, and there's different sages, and there's the
Yerba Santa.
Yerba Santa. There's a lot of, but when I started trying different leaves, and an incredible percentage of the plant life there is like that.
Yeah.
Strongly aromatic, and you can smell it and you can taste it.
Ruvain Ben-Human got with no background in this, got into the plants. He got into gardening at Tassajara and became an amazing gardener. He got into the plants in the woods, and he started creating herbal mixtures. He created a smoking mixture that Peter Schneider had to outlaw because it was a high. Now, Yerba Santa will give you, like you have some tea. If you're very pure, it has a very subtle, beautiful sort of high to it. Very, very subtle. You can't notice it unless you're pretty pure. But
wow.
Ruvain found all sorts of stuff. And he got into one where he got deathly ill. Wow. He recovered from it pretty quickly, and he said he was walking up the road there from where the cabins are, toward the Zen Center, going over the bridge, and he passed, and Suzuki looked at him and said, "Never do that again." And
with no knowledge of what happened.
I don't know. I don't remember I have that in Tassajara stories. I don't remember what Ruvain said. He said, but something like that. Really angry at him, telling him, don't do that. Suzuki would do things like that sometimes.
From listening to you and others talk about him, you get the sense that he had a strong, or like a really good understanding of how to use the balance of kindness and anger, like when anger was necessary as a form of kindness. Is that true?
Yeah, I'd say that's true. It wasn't like something deliberate or controlled. It was just natural. And he had, but he said he had a problem with anger. And I know from interviewing people and knowing mainly from his kids, that his problem with anger mainly manifested before he came to America, and that he was very, very strict and traditional in many ways, especially with family. The people would tell the kids, how wonderful the father was and how different and especially was. And they just experienced him as being a lot stricter than other parents and sort of distant and cold. And, he ate by himself and he changed. When he came to America, practically became a hippie compared to what he was like in Japan. Really changed.
Few people changed that dramatically.
Yeah.
In their lives, and people tend to kind of track in more or less the same general range, I would say.
Oh yeah. No, he had major evolutions of his being in his life, and one of them was when he came to America. He was very well. That's enough of that. I'm thinking about one thing you talked about with me. You talked about it in the city. You brushed on it, but was how much more? You mentioned it in the city with Daya, your mother. Oh, you say my mom, but you're talking about Daya Goldschlag, who used to be Dianne Goldschlag, and how much you appreciated the Zen practice that was happening there. How much more you appreciated it than you had in the past. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. Yeah. I love meditation, and I don't meditate that much. My meditations tend to be like little moments these days. I will meditate with people. What actually shifted me to be more relaxed and appreciative meditation wasn't Zen. It was doing Vipassana once, because Vipassana is so freaking intense. And I, having grown up around Zen Center and not having a meditation practice as my background, I had never done a sesshin, which I think is probably the same thing. But so that was like my first sesshin-like experience, and they're 12 days. And when you meditate, you're meditating 9 hours a day, and you just get completely over any resistance or irritation about it. And then you can sink into it. And it's just this wonderful place. It's like, it's being in the present moment is a refuge. It's a salvation. And when you can be there, and when you go through that kind of experience, you can kind of let go and get there. And so I think that I was more ready this time, partially because of that. And I, don't tend to identify with belief systems or cultural practices or religious practices or whatever. So I liked the being part of Zen Center, and I had an affinity for the practices there, but I didn't relate to them personally so much, as they seemed kind of unnecessary, like arbitrary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I felt different this time, because I think that when you choose clothing, it allows you to kind of relax into something, and it holds you. And I really felt that way about the Zen practice, the full moon ceremony in particular, but everything about it, I recognized it was crafted to kind of give a rhythm and an approach to bring people into deeper into themselves. And I so enjoyed it. And the Dharma talk I heard from Leslie, it totally balanced my nervous system. Like when I got back from Tassajara, I felt I was where I wanted to be. And then I actually went into kind of a whiplash experience, being in a really intense modern life filled with too many things and running a business. And it was actually kind of hard on me. But yeah, and also you just so see how much Suzuki Roshi impacted people in a really deep way. And that's carried forward, and that's what Tassajara represents, is he brought this practice, but this way of being that people wanted to continue, and they're still trying to continue it.
Yeah.
And
there was probably no one there who didn't come. There was probably no one there who arrived at Zen Center before he died.
Oh, wow.
But I do believe what you said is right. His influence continues, and he wouldn't say it's him. It's just passing on, Buddhism as he understood it, and everybody gets their own understanding, their own way of expressing it, and one thing that I think is that Buddhism is passed on, and not just Buddhism, other, spiritual practices and any sort of practice, crafts, art, whatever. Things are passed on by imperfect people, and sometimes very flawed people, and especially in America. I think there's this problem, there's been the cancel culture thing of writing people off because of their flaws. It's been especially focusing on sexual impropriety, more than abusiveness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Are you saying that you perceive that with people in around Tassajara in spiritual communities in general?
Yeah. No, yeah. In America, in the spiritual communities in general, but in American culture in general, like Stanley Kubrick said about making movies. He said, kiss it, it's X. Cut it off, it's PG.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's two things about what you just said. One is when I was at Tassajara the prior time, which was 4 years ago, I think. I was surprised by what I considered a lot of fear consciousness, that the kind of what is now called the whole woke thing, that there's all this reaction against that kind of feeling and mentality, which to me I perceive as a victim consciousness. Seemed pretty strong, and there was too much of the gender stuff. There was too much of the being careful with everything and everybody, and it felt stuck. It did not feel liberated, and it felt like fear-based.
Yeah.
And I really didn't like it, but I've experienced that. I mean, I have an affinity for spiritual communities, and we work at a certain number of monasteries and spiritual communities, and I love being there. I love what they do, but it's a really common theme you see is this high level of carefulness and caution that ends up being kind of fear victim mentality. But when I was there this spring, I felt a lot less of that. And I think that's maybe partly because the work leader, I can't remember what his name was. I can't remember if it was, I wish I could remember his name. But he was a friend of mine down there, and he was just real kind of transactional in a good way, just get it done and not too worried about like details. And then the director also had kind of a scrappy toughness to her. She actually got ordained with my mom as well, ironically. And I feel like the leadership really makes a difference. And there was less of that, which made me happy. And I do also think there was more of that around COVID.
Yeah. Well, what I remember you said in going down there, or before you went down, you said their would you call it their COVID protocol, or their protocol for not passing on anything that can be transmitted was awfully extreme. You said it was sort of like it was in the middle of the worst part of the COVID epidemic.
Well, yeah, and even this time.
No, this time you.
Oh yeah, exactly. I was super irritated about that. I mean, the reasoning, they wanted us to take a test beforehand, take a test like on the way there, take a test when we get there, be ready to take another test. And, their explanation was that people are kind of isolated at Tassajara, and that there's people that are older and that they want to protect them. And I just think that you can't control reality that much, and that people you can't fight it off forever. And most people aren't dying, and you just can't control reality and be in fear consciousness. And I think it's counter to waking up. And it does not acknowledge any sort of higher purpose or any trust in kind of how things are unfolding.
Yeah.
But anyway,
yeah.
What do you do?
That's interesting. I've been very impressed. I was impressed, and I still am impressed with the way COVID was dealt with here in Bali and Indonesia. Just there wasn't all the politicizing and fighting about it. And the hospital, I've gone to the it's like going to Kaiser. They have every type of doctor and test and everything. I've gone to many times this month because I'm catching up, right? I've told you about that. And the glass partitions have come down. There is COVID here, very little. But you don't have to wear a mask. You haven't had to wear a mask there for, I don't know. I can't remember when it went away, mainly. But people do wear masks. A number of them wear masks, especially the people who work there, because they're subjected to all these other people coming in there, right? But it's pretty loose. And anyway, in America, America just has a problem with so many angry people and people who stir up the anger. There was a guy here. He was the head guy in the big punk band here. And it's sort of, he was older. He was like 40, the punk thing was a while back, but he still was very popular. Well, he led an anti-mask rally near the beginning of COVID, and he was arrested and got a 2-year jail sentence right away. You can go to jail here for disrespecting the medical community. So anyway,
that's funny.
He retracted it and they let him out. He said, "I take it back."
Oh gosh, yep. Yeah, well, we're the opposite here, because we're Eastern Washington and then close to Idaho, and running a tree company when during COVID, during the heat of the COVID epidemic, if I had a fair number of clients where I'd walk up to their door and they'd come out and just give me a big handshake or a big hug, and it was like a statement, but they didn't have higher COVID rates, and so I'm not sure what I think about all that.
Well, wait a minute.
But,
Republican states did have higher COVID rates and higher death rates, definitely.
Okay, that's good to know. In Idaho, I don't think that was the case.
Well, it might not have been. They're all spread out there more, maybe, or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there was a big difference there. And we lost many good Republicans, and there was a phenomena happening there that nurses were reporting with people dying of COVID in these more there were plenty of MAGA people everywhere, and refusing to admit it,
Well, people.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a very close friend. You met him, who's been sort of MAGA type. He's been MAGAtized, and he got COVID, and he insisted on calling it a flu. Which because he's brainwashed by Fox, and that sort of people. Which is interesting. But anyway, he's a nice guy. I like him. All right. Enough of that.
I mentioned the director of Tassajara, which is Heather. I don't know if you know, like Shoren, Heather. But she's really great to work with. Because she cares a lot, but she's results oriented, and actually that was true with Catherine when I was down there the prior time. Like both really strong directors, and it made it so nice to work down there.
Yeah, well, the Zen Center has had some very practical people through the years who've and it has survived. It's done very well for an institution. The sort of extreme rules for COVID, it's the sort of thing that can happen with institutions. Institutions tend to create more and more rules and restrictions. They're really good at doing that, and they're really good at saying no and not wanting exceptions. That's always a struggle with institutions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I dealt with bureaucracy with the state government of California and for Zen Center. And there's a thing about dealing with bureaucracies. For one thing, I didn't disrespect people in it. We got to have bureaucracies, and almost all bureaucrats are trying very hard to do a good job. And, people that want to get rid of bureaucracy and want to get rid of regulations, they might. It's like taking down stop signs and red lights. You've got to do it carefully. There's
society. Yeah, I mean, society is building an infrastructure, right? I mean, humans are creating this framework to exist in, and it's going to be messy, and there's always going to be this oscillation between the intricateness of that system and then it being inefficient because of that. So, like, as a business owner, we have labor insurance here, and everyone that works in there, when you're talking about Wellington bureaucrats, are the nicest people and just want to help you, and they're great to deal with. The structure of it is absolutely awful and obstructionary. And people, humans, but definitely, probably first world nations, and I feel like particularly in this country, but I don't know, are drowning in endless minutia of having to deal with software, paperwork, systems, people, gadgets, and it's just stressing everybody out.
Yeah.
And you have to make systems so that they're kind of more automated and they're more streamlined.
Yeah.
And otherwise you just, they take you down.
Yeah, there's way too many laws and rules and regulations, and they have to always be, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. But politicians that run on getting rid of regulations, they're focusing on getting rid of regulations to keep the air, the water, and the land clean for big business. So that big business can pollute, and they're not really helping with the stuff that irritates the little guy all the time. And small businesses have so much trouble. I think AI might help with that. Bill Maher has been really strong on this, oh, man. Yeah. Well, anyway, and I've seen it in the Zen Center, as more there. You get more and more ceremonies and more rules, but then they also, it's sort of cyclical,
Yeah. Well, rules, rules are guidelines, right? And guidelines, rules, laws, whatever, they're there to try to facilitate the best practice. But the problem is reality is more complex than that. And so when you become excellent at anything, rules and guidelines and laws become obsolete because they're not precise enough. They're going to work 80% of the time or whatever, but then they're going to not work 20% of the time. And if you're, a thoughtful, experienced police officer, or if you're a surgeon, or in my case, an arborist, once you get good at something, you don't follow the rules anymore because they're not precise enough to do a really good job.
You not only had experiences at Tassajara, you had experiences at Green Gulch, but and through the years, I think maybe you might want to, is there anything you'd like to mention that you haven't said yet in that realm?
A couple things. Growing up in a intentional community, especially with the size of Zen Center where you have multiple locations, it's formative in a way that I wish more people could have. because there's a safety, and there was a coldness. When growing up, people were focused on, enlightenment, right? And at that time, there was this naiveness to it because a lot of the people had fled, Christianity or more of a traditional, hierarchical, patriarchal American culture, and were looking for greater wisdom. And they associated that with the philosophy, and they neglected the family. And so there was this weird kind of, you had this freedom and this safety at the places, and it was so amazing to be a kid there. But the culture of it was not warm toward children. I mean, I specifically remember people like Robert
Lytle.
Yeah. Like just how much he kind of took me under his wing, and there was other people like that. But for the most part, you felt a little tense as a kid, and there wasn't this warm family kind of vibe. I work with a number of Mormons who I'm close to. I went to a Mormon ceremony recently, like a church event, and I don't relate at all to the ideology and the overemphasis on, the Father and the externalization of the divine outside of oneself. But the people are so connected, and the kids.
We had a technical problem here. It wasn't recorded for a minute, and I asked him just to start over with this Mormon thing.
I went to a service recently, a Mormon weekly service, and listened to them speak, and it was a Father's Day ceremony, and there was singing and people talking about their fathers, and it was really a lovely experience. I didn't relate at all to the ideology because it was very masculine based, right? Focusing on the Father and Jesus. And it was very externalizing of the divine, of the connection. It didn't really bring people into their own self as the source of divine. And I don't really respect that, but the families are the nicest people I know, and their kids are the healthiest kids I know. And when I grew up, my peers, a lot of them really struggled, and there wasn't a sense of connection because it was not embodied yet. And I think what's happened, we're at a point in our society where embodiment is where we are, and people know it. You can't. And back in the day, you could be a guru and you could be an alcoholic, or you could live a lifestyle that wasn't consistent with your teaching, but you can't do that anymore. Everybody knows. Everybody knows that you are the guru, and everybody knows that what's hypocrisy. But back then they didn't, and so there wasn't this embodiment of kindness and love and inclusion that I think is much more understood now.
Oh, that's good to hear.
So that's
good to hear. Let me say something about the Mormons. They're the best. They take care of each other. They take care of each other better than anyone.
But Joseph Smith, who was the founder, he said some things that are consistent with more profound, esoteric, spiritual teachings. And, I know there's a lot of wacky stuff, but there's some overlap.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of good things about the Mormons. They're great neighbors. There's a lot of ex-norms. There's a tremendous amount of problems in the Mormon culture and community, but there's a lot of harmony there too. But that's interesting.
Going back to your question about growing up around Zen Center, something that I think was probably meaningful to most kids that grew up there, definitely for me, is the pageantry of it. Like the statues and the bells and the smell of incense and the robes. It like gives you a sense of place and kind of specialness and wonder and magic that is unique. And I think it's one of the things that helps people that come from old cultures. It's like almost like when you read a fairy tale and you're brought into like a place that is special having those accoutrements around you definitely grounds you in the place, and it's something that you carry forth. And I know people who grew up in Catholicism, even people who don't like it, often feel that way about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Zazen too, like it's, as a kid, it's like torture, right? To sit for 40 minutes. But it's also something that's kind of like a test, right? Or like a coming of age thing, whatever age it is that you get to go through.
Yeah, but no kids were ever made to sit Zazen.
No, but I think that was a little bit of a failing, because I feel like so many people who were of that era were fleeing indoctrination, and were fleeing dogma, and so they didn't want to impose that. But what they didn't understand is that community and church are really important,
right,
to a strong foundation.
Right, I agree.
And I think that could have been offered more. I think it would have been good.
Yeah. When you were growing up, my Zazen and my practice was associated with Zen Center. And when Clay was growing up, it was associated with home. And I had I used to not be, so I did sit some, but in the last few decades, my home is my temple, and I sit every day, and I have various practices, but they're personal in a sense. They're not. I have no group, or Katrinka and I don't sit. We both sit. We don't sit at the same time. We have different practices, but it's really good. Like, I'm going to be spending a month in Germany. I'll enjoy that. And Dick would really appreciate, Dick Baker would appreciate what you have to say. He really was into giving Zen Center a form, and statues. He was really into the statues. And, he forced Zen Center to get those beautiful Gandhara Gupta statues from Afghanistan shortly after becoming avid. I was involved with that. Everybody said, what, $25,000 for statues? You kidding? Silas was just outraged. But Dick has all sorts of ideas and around form and the form of Zen Center. He felt it had to have Green Gulch. The city in Tassajara wasn't enough, and everybody on the board was against getting Green Gulch. But
wow,
he really forced it on Zen Center. He did the same thing with his German group. He forced them to greatly expand their retreat at a time where they could hardly keep their retreat going. And he was right. It's like build the field and the players will come.
Yeah. Good for him.
Yeah. Anyway, I enjoy being there. I enjoy sitting with them and having more fun. We eat orioke breakfast but they're loose as heck. They're not. I mean, we'll see what it's like now, but my experience in the past has been very comfortable, not fear-based, not overwoke. Everything was like pretty natural. Very comfortable. I feel very comfortable there. Well, is there anything you have to add?
I feel like, in closing, I feel like that in spite of not having practiced Zen when I was young, identifying with it culturally because people find it interesting and, it's fun to have that as a background. I find that in the end, it had more influence on me than I realized it was. than it did, and that my pursuit of being where I am, I think, is stronger than if I hadn't have experienced that, And when I read, Eckhart Tolle has that book, The Power of Now, that everybody reads.
Yeah.
And when I read that book a number of years ago, I was so impressed with his ability to words to bring people in to understand what it means more to be in the present moment. But like messaging doesn't work, you know what I mean? I mean, it's kind of like, well, I read this. I started Reb's book when I was on top, so I grabbed it. It's I think it's called The Third Turning of the Wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically the first turning is Buddha saying, like, here's the path. And the second turning is 500 years later, the incarnation of Buddha to others saying there is no path. The third turning is coming back to there is no path, but to understand there's no path, we need to like start on the path kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you believe something because you grew up around it, it kind of gets into your skin and into your cells, and it becomes like a guiding principle. And I do think my understanding that there was something real, my absolute belief, just by default of having grown up there, that the most value comes from being where you are in this moment, and that there really is no other place.
Right.
I don't think I would have the same allegiance to that and effort to experience that through my daily practices if I had not grown up in Zen Center, and that's without, pursuing that as my personal path.
Yeah. 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 Well, I feel the same way, but, I grew up in a home that gave me a really good foundation, but I really needed Zen Center to give it direction and give it form and give it, so much. You
know what else? Something I almost said that I think relates when you were talking about how, people that carry Zen or found Zen Center, how they're normal people with normal problems. One of the paradoxes, whatever word you want to use, that I have been thinking about is we are in this avatar having these experiences with many challenges. And the idea of transcending to some enlightened state is really silly because it's pretty hard here. And we and we're meant to be here and have this experience. But I think it really seems apparent that we have our godlike selves that have immense potential and are not of this space, and that you can experience the kind of godlike nature of people through their daily avatar at times.
Hey, please define avatar.
Avatar just means like a body that's you're in. It's like a placeholder for your spirit. It's like it's like a suit. It's like a suit.
Oh.
Your avatar is like your suit, right?
Oh.
It's like if you were going to be a superhero or whatever. So like when I say avatar, I mean that we're just picking some robes. You come in at a particular time, which if you buy into astrology, that defines how you come in, and supposedly our souls pick the place, the parents, some other aspects. And so there's a high probability that you'll have certain experiences and certain lessons when you're here based on those choices. And so your higher self, your soul, is projecting through a particular place on earth into a particular body, which I say avatar because it's temporary. It's like what we're going to use, the robes we're here with, right? But then other lifetimes or places, it will be different robes. David Kelly will never exist again. But then behind that is this really vast godlike consciousness that comes through us, and that can be tapped into. And that's why so many people that are brilliant at some things are limited in others, because there is the brilliance that we can tap into.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can keep that. All right. So, hey,
Yeah.
this has been good. Enjoyed. Yeah, I'm dizzy with communicating with you.
I know. But it was cool, and I'm glad we got it. I'm glad we made time.
That was good. Okay. Take care. Very good. Glad we did this.
Okay. Love you, Dad. Catch you later.
And until we meet again.
Indeed.
So thanks a lot, Kelly. Kelly Chadwick. I appreciate that. That was good. That was really good. I had to cut I figured 47 minutes out of what Kelly and I said because we would get off course and talk about various things. So this was what was left of it. And now I'm going to read you what I've got so far. He's going to add something to it. I asked him to add that bit about when he was his earliest memory, which he thinks was 1.5. Wow, pretty good. I've got an old memory that's something like that. So I'm going to read that to you, and then we will bid each other adieu. Kelly's Epiphany. Now, I've returned to Tassajara many times, David, in the summer for 10 days or so and washed guest dishes, which gave me a window to say hi to old Zen friends and guests who were dropping off a cup or a dish to be cleaned. Kelly and later my younger son, Clay, would go with me. They both would usually work in the kitchen. Kelly lives in Spokane, where he has a tree trimming company named Spirit Pruners. This year, for the third time, he and a crew went to Tassajara in April for a week of tree work. I called him up and asked him to share something with us about his experience there. Here's some of what he said. There is such a distinct, tangible, sensory experience at Tassajara of intelligence and warmth. It's as if the ecosystem of that place and the actual specific location of Tassajara and also the buildings, the human aspect of it, is like a unified consciousness, a unified intelligence that holds the space. When I stood on the Suzuki Roshi Ashes Site Ridge and looked out at Tassajara Creek on the south side, I had a strong perception of the trees being emissaries of the land and that they were aware of our presence. There's something about Tassajara that feels ridiculously safe. I think it's partially the isolation of it, but there's something else that's nurturing and loving and intelligence about that place that I've never experienced anywhere else in my life. My initial experience with the spirit realm like this was the first time I went back as an adult. I was walking toward the bridge from the courtyard, and suddenly I had this overwhelming sense of something around me, like a being that was the spirit of Tassajara surrounded me, presented itself, and reminded me that it had been there and supported me when I was young. It was completely overwhelming, and I started crying. And I didn't cry then. I pretty much did not cry from the age of 5 till 40. I've been much more in touch with my feelings about Tassajara ever since. After that, when I went back, it was less separated from me. It was more something I could feel all the time. And I think it's something I've noticed in intact ecosystems. Like in a really beautiful ecosystem, you can experience kind of a unified consciousness of that place, the spirit of the place. And Tassajara totally, completely has that. And I feel like the spirit of that place does relate to people. I feel like it's easier to go into a deep state of reverence to nature there than other places. Tassajara is surrounded by steep but low mountains. The weather and the climatic dynamics there are remarkable. Just the most beautiful clouds and light and the wind and everything about it. The natives knew that, and they came there. And then they were displaced, and now we're there. But the energy of what the people there are doing is still in deep reverence to the experience of existence and to the earth. I don't see it as random. The crew and I went on a beautiful hike with a baby. I felt this thread, a generational thread. I thought about all the stories you guys tell and the pictures of the pioneers and the people down there and having kids. And I'm walking with these people at this later age, coming back, and I feel like a full circle. I was remembering our ancestors and people who are still alive, like you, who had this experience. We crossed the creek at the bottom of the Tony Trail. That's where the kids would meet, where we used to go and have a school kind of experience. There was an old swing still there, and so we hung out by the swing, and the baby swung on the swing, and it was just really sweet. Even though the grass was tall and the old swing was rusty, it still worked. When we were walking there, a red fox ran along next to me on the opposite side of the creek for a little ways. I thought that was significant because animals, all life forms, show up in intelligence and are a language. Red foxes supposedly represent discernment, trusting intuition, and being adaptable, but also that change may be coming, and I must be able to navigate it. I definitely felt the fox was there expressing meaning. And when I came back from Tassajara, I felt great because it was so amazing having spent the time there working and meditating, and my nervous system was in an optimum space. It was very clear to me how in regular life my nervous system does not exist in that space. I had such a deep appreciation for who Suzuki Roshi was when I was there this time. The whole experience of pruning there was different than any other time I've been in Tassajara. I feel like in the past there was an abstractness to my relationship with Tassajara where I loved it. I loved to talk about it, but it was kind of the idea of it more. And this time when I was there, I really appreciated the place. I really appreciated meditation. I had so much respect for people living that life of trying to be a monk or being like a monk, because it is a tool that was created back a long time ago. And the lineage of people, the chants of the ancestors, recognizing this vessel, this technology, is so effective in getting people to transcend this experience, to go deeply into themselves, to pierce the veil. It's one of the methods that people carried through the generations. When I was there at Tassajara, just being around people doing that, I had so much respect for it. I loved participating in it, and the full moon ceremony was so moving. But also just seeing what an impact Suzuki Roshi had and what he created, and just looking at the stone walls and knowing how meaningful that was to people working with stones and working with him with stones and how he expressed the practice. You can really feel it at Tassajara. I had never had that same appreciation or reverence, which I did very much this time. This has been a Cuke audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogga Bandita, Feline Manacita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.